We continue our studies of Pirkei Avot, and if you have a text with you, which I hope you do, you will please turn to Pirkei Avot chapter 2, and it's Mishnah number 2. Last week we found that the Mishnah number 1 was quite extensive and compound, and so we studied the last part of the first Mishnah last week. So tonight, actually, I think we may do something similar, because this Mishnah is also longer than the typical sort of pithy formulations in this tractate, and therefore we're going to look closely, as we like to do, at the first part of the Mishnah and the second part, which stands on its own feet, so to speak. Hopefully we will take that up next week. Okay, so we have Rabban Gamliel beno shel Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi Omer. Just by way of biographical context, we're talking here about that is to say, Rabban Gamliel, Tana of our Mishnah, is the son of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. That means he's the son of Rebbe from last week's Mishnah. If you remember, we described in some detail the personality of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, who is known with affection and with reverence as Rebbe, the rabbi par excellence. So this it was his son, who was known as Rabban Gamliel the second, really, because he had an ancestor, I think a grandfather or great-grandfather, also called Rabban Gamliel. And so he is the son of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the successor of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. And his teaching is the following. Just one further observation. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, we said, was the great Torah personality, leader of the generation, but at the same time, he was also the temporal leader, the political leader. You could say in Anglo-Jewish terms, he was like the chief rabbi and the Av Bet Din and the chairman of the president of Board of Deputies. And what else do we have? Jewish Leadership Council and the leading donor and supporter of UGIA as well, if you want to say it in Anglo-Jewish terms. I'm being a little bit facetious here, but the Torah says, the Talmud says about Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi that he embodied Torah u'gedula b'makom echad. It's a very elegant, simple but elegant turn of phrase, Torah u'gedula b'makom echad. That is to say, Torah leadership, Torah eminence, and gedula, greatness in the sense of wealth, prestige, influence, a statesman, and a communal leader, b'makom echad, that were united in one place, in one personality. The reason I'm indulging in that biographical reminisce, because we discussed it 2 weeks ago as well, is that the Mishnah that we're going to do tonight, Rabban Gamliel beno, his son, has a teaching which I would suggest reflects the stature of Rabban Gamliel himself as the son of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi and the successor of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, because he speaks about Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz, that Torah study is acceptable together with an occupation. Yafet Talmud Torah, it's pleasing or worthy, Talmud Torah, the study of Torah, together with derech eretz. Now, derech eretz is usually understood as an occupation, the way of the world, like it says, Hanheg behem minhag derech eretz, that the words of Torah should be combined together with derech eretz. And this has been seen as a pithy formulation of the importance of joining together, of what some say synthesizing Torah with worldly pursuit, with earning a livelihood as well. You may know that Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, the famous so-called neo-Orthodox leader of German Jewry in the 19th century, this was his credo, and the educational system, and indeed his whole approach to Torah and to life itself is rooted in that principle. But I'm not going to elaborate too much on his particular approach, but yes, it reflects this idea of Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz. But the Mishnah goes on to say why it's good to join the study of Torah with the pursuit of a livelihood. Shegias shnehem mashkachas avon, because the exertion in both of them together makes sin forgotten, or perhaps it means a person, let's say, doesn't have time to sin. If he's involved and if he pursues as twin objectives, earning a livelihood, and the study of Torah. It doesn't mean to the exclusion of all other important interests or responsibilities that he may have, but if a person sets those as twin objectives, twin arenas for his energies, so the two of them together, mashkachas avon, he won't have time to sin. We'll look at that more closely very soon. V'chol Torah she'eni ma melacha sofa b'tel v'gareres avon, which is a kind of restatement of the same idea, that any Torah that does not have melacha together with it, melacha, we can see that as work or some productive labor. Sofa betela, ultimately it will cease in the end, v'goreres avon, and it will lead to sin. So I'd like to start our analysis today with a comment that I saw in this little compendium I've shown you before. It's called Chafetz Chaim al Pirkei Avos. I think it's not so much a commentary that the great Chafetz Chaim himself wrote on Pirkei Avos, but I think it's collected from his various writings and teachings by a disciple, and it has been arranged as a commentary on Pirkei Avos. I acquired it many years ago, and he has a pithy comment here regarding this phrase, Kol Torah she'eni ma melacha sofa betela. Any study of Torah that is not joined with work will ultimately cease. So he says that if Torah without work is futile, is ultimately has no future, has no sustainability, then all the more so work without Torah. Kol shekei melacha she'eni ma Torah is certainly going to lead to sin and will have no future. And I think that, again, it's a kind of almost, it's like a quip, really. It's almost a sardonic statement. But again, there's so much truth in that. I'm thinking not only in terms of what I do as an adult or what another person may do in terms of allocating his time, recognizing, of course, the need to earn a livelihood, and also the study of Torah, but what about how we train our children, including teenagers or even those at the university level? If we orient their education, and if we see their or our role as parents in enabling a son or a daughter to earn a livelihood, to pursue a craft or a trade or a discipline or earn a degree that has earning power, but we neglect the Torah aspect, then if the Mishnah tells us that Torah without a malacha will not is not sustainable, how much more so is the opposite true as well? And that's why I think that one of the very worthy institutions that we have in our community is what's known as the evening base at Ner Yisrael in Hendon. And I'm particularly conscious of it because my son Yehuda has been benefiting from their shiurim and the learning environment and the camaraderie and the social context as well. It's enjoyed by young men who are students, university students in many cases, sometimes those who are in the workforce, as Yehuda is. And it's a way of joining together pursuit of a livelihood, pursuit of a degree perhaps, which is hopefully will lead to some gainful employment or earning power, but it joins it together with the study of Torah. So that's the quip of the Chafetz Chaim, that all the more so the study, the Amalacha She'eni Ma Torah. I'd like to take this a step further and share with you a little story. It's possibly apocryphal. Again, it may be more of a humorous illustration, but as is frequently the case, I think there's a lot of truth to it as well. Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz. So the idea, I said, combining the two, joining the two, synthesizing the two, but at some times it can be actually a matter of like interweaving the two pursuits. A person who has a shop, let's say, probably in our circles, not that many of our peers are shop owners, but perhaps some of them are. But a generation or two ago, that was very commonly the case. A lot of Jews were in retail. So the story is told of a man who inherited a shop from his father, and he was pursuing the business as best he could, and but he wasn't getting customers, and he couldn't understand it because his father had customers all the time, and we had a brisk turnover. So he went to the Rebbe and said, "I don't know what's happening. I've inherited the shop from my father. Nothing has changed. I've got the same suppliers, the same keen prices. People, I've got no customers." So the Rebbe said, "Tell me, you're doing exactly like your father?" I said, "Yeah, the same thing." So he said, "Tell me, if you don't have customers, so what do you do when customers are so rare?" He says, "Well, I read the newspaper, catch up on the news, or maybe read a novel or something like that." So the Rebbe said, "That's why you've got no customers." He said, "Your father, if there were no customers, he would take the time to learn a bit of Mishnayos or say some Tehillim, and this galled the Satan all the time. The Satan thought that he's learning Torah like this. I'm going to distract him with customers. So I send him customers so he won't be able to learn. But you're wasting your time anyway. So why should the Satan trouble himself to distract you with customers as if you're not accomplishing anything?" So this is the idea that even if a person is involved in pursuit of a livelihood, but there may be Torah opportunities even along the way. That is to say, even in the context of his livelihood. The expression "Yigias shnehem hashkachas avon." So I'd like to suggest a contemporary application of this idea. The pursuit or the exertion, Yigia means exertion. Exertion in the two of them together, mashkachas avon, will suppress a transgression. So one could think of it in terms that a person who has to work and he spends his time pursuing a livelihood, he's an employee or he's an employer, whatever it might be, but when he's not working, so he has time for the study of Torah. And if he does both of those activities together, he won't have time to get into mischief and to commit various types of transgressions, which can often take up one's time. But it's interesting to consider that how things have changed since the days of the Mishnah. Nowadays, we have so many time-saving devices. And we've got telecommunications, and we have podcasts. Even years ago, we had already fax machines and computer processors and that sort of thing. And I recall how Lord Jacobovitz, the late Lord Jacobovitz, once said to me, or he said to a friend, I overheard him, he said, we have so many time-saving devices. Modern technology has created so many time-saving devices. I often wonder, what do we do with all the time that we saved? Somehow we don't seem to actually have more time despite all of these time-saving devices. Well, one thing we do is we check our email and text messages continuously. I just did a bit of research. I think the average American, maybe American teenager, but I think adults as well, checks his phone, his mobile device 96 times a day. It's about once every 10 minutes. And I mean, that itself is a distraction. And to be honest, I find myself guilty of that as well. Some years ago, and again, it may have changed slightly because we're doing different types of leisure activities, but television, the average American watched 35 hours a week of television. Television is 35 hours a week. That's on average 5 hours a day. So we have time-saving devices, but so many of those devices are also time sinks. And this is the spirit of the Mishnah in saying that if a person recognizes that in his spare time he should study Torah, again, it's not the only legitimate activity in your spare time, but if a person has that as an important part of his life, then the pursuit of a livelihood and the Torah study will make sin less common. But I'd like to just elaborate a little bit further or expand on this idea of the time-saving devices and the benefits of technology. There's no question, and certainly we all, and I know certainly many of the people at Kesher are great consumers of Torah on the internet, through Torah Anytime, through podcasts, and through so many different media that are available at one's convenience. I mean, even this Shiur, which is recorded, is going to go on YouTube, and it's possible to access it. And so that's a wonderful thing. And certainly, I mean, this whole Zoom Shiur as well couldn't have taken place even a few years ago. It would have been impractical or maybe uneconomical. We can do it right now. So I'm not talking down technology at all. But I would still make the observation, if we just look at that expression, Torah she'ein imah melacha, there's another way to interpret it. Torah she'ein imah melacha, that doesn't have work together with it. One can see it in terms of Torah, which can be accessed without any work. It's easily achievable. It's easily accessible. It's at your leisure, and you can even do it on your daily commute. You can do it while you're jogging. You can do it simultaneously with so many other activities, and you can learn Torah on the go. This is a fantastic thing, and I'm not trying to talk it down. However, to a certain degree, it's easy come and easy go. Torah she'eni ma'melacha, Torah that can be acquired, can be accessed very easily, very readily, very conveniently. Do we retain it in the same way? Does it affect us in the same way? Do we remember it as well? Perhaps we do. I don't know. I'm not a cognitive psychologist. I'm sure a lot of research has been done, but I do have a suspicion that like it says, Torah she'eni ma'melacha, if it comes so easily, I wonder if we retain it as well. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was, without question, one of the great Torah personalities of the 20th century, and he was renowned for his extraordinary memory. He wrote volumes of responsive literature, displaying tremendous erudition and breadth as well. And there were many occasions where he didn't have access to Sfarim. I don't mean because he was during the Holocaust years, maybe that as well. He came to America actually before the Holocaust, but I'm sure he had some very difficult times in his earlier years in the Soviet Union. But I'm just talking about in the summertime when he would go to the, what they call in America, in New York, they call it the mountains, go to the Catskills, and he would take questions that had been addressed to him in order to write the tshuvas. Sometimes he wouldn't have all the svarim with him. He would just pick up the pen and he would write, quoting, by heart. So I'm sure he was blessed with a great memory. But Rav Moshe Feinstein reviewed the Shulchan Aruch 400 times. So it wasn't just that he was blessed with a great memory, with a extraordinary memory. He exerted enormous effort to achieve that as well. In our own times, I'm sure you've heard of Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, that's Anthony's friend in Bnei Brak. So Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky makes a siyum every year on Erev Pesach, in which he celebrates completion of the entire Talmud, the entire Rambam, the Tur, the Shulchan Aruch, and a lot more. And he does it every year, every Erev Pesach, according to what they say, and I'm not certain if it's absolutely true or it's a measure of exaggeration. He recently, as of this past Erev Pesach, completed his 76th machzor of learning all of that every year. Now, my point again is to say he doesn't just rely on the fact that he has a outstanding memory, but there's that investment, there's that malacha, there's that exertion as well. I'd like to share with you a thought which I think is quite inspiring. I was listening to, Baruch Atah Adonai Melech Haolam Shehakol Nehelu. There's a slight irony here because I'm discoursing on the limitations of the technology, but I listened to a short clip of a shiur given by a great Torah figure in Jerusalem called Rabbi Asher Weiss. You may have heard of him. He's American. He was born in Brooklyn. He's lived in Israel for many years. He's got a lovely style, very accessible. He happened to be speaking in Hebrew, but he's a Native American, English speaker. Not a Native American in the full sense, but anyway, he's an English speaker. But this happened to be in Hebrew. And he was giving a shiur about enabling how a person can achieve that objective, which any student of Torah or another discipline would have, to remember what he learns. Very difficult. Some people have like a photographic memory, but that's exceptionally rare. We all struggle to try to remember what we learned, to try to retain it. I'm certainly no exception to that. So he was saying that the people sometimes ask him, or they're looking around for a segula, for some kind of like divine blessing, some activity or some maybe charm that will enable a person to achieve success in remembering the Torah that he studies. So he says he found in a certain sefer, he didn't identify the sefer, that a segula, to remember the Torah that you learn, is the first snowfall of the season. You take some of the snow and you rub it on your forehead. Why? Because sheleg is, what's the value of sheleg gematria? Very easy, shin lamed gimel 333. Excuse me, it's the same gematria as shikha. Shikha means forgetting. So if you rub the snow on your forehead, so he said, I don't think this is such a reliable segula. He said, if it works, he said, you will probably remember it until the snow melts on your forehead, yeah, a matter of seconds. He said, but they once asked the Chavetz Chaim a segula to remember Torah. So he quoted the pasuk in the very beginning of Tehillim, the second verse in Tehillim, Ki im b'Torah Hashem chefzo. What's the pasuk? I'm sorry. Yeah, because Ki im b'Torah Hashem chefzo v'soraso yehegeh yomam v'layla. That if a person's desire is in the Torah and he studies the Torah day and night, so then he'll remember the Torah. That was the Chavetz Chaim's response. He didn't elaborate further. So Rabbi Asher Weiss said that I've got another pasuk, he said, which I would like to add on. And I think it's a very beautiful pasuk, and I'd like to share it with you. The pasuk says, if you want to make a note of it, it's in Tehillim chapter 119, verse 16. Tehillim Kuf Yutes. He says, the pasuk says, "B'chukosecha eshta'asha lo eshkach devarecha." Or devarcha. B'chukosecha eshta'asha, in your statutes I will delight. Lo eshkach devarecha, I won't forget your words. And there it's almost explicit, this idea that if a person takes delight in the Torah, so then he will remember it. And Radak, the famous medieval commentator, Rav David Kimchi, says the following, very easy Hebrew, I like to read it. Kisha'ani mitbonen bahem, when I contemplate them, when I look deeply into the words of Torah, I delight in them. It brings me such pleasure when I study, when I contemplate, when I seek to delve into your words of Torah. Therefore, I won't forget them. Because these words of Torah are for me a source of joy and jubilation of the heart. So just like a person doesn't forget the birthdays of his children, he doesn't forget the names of his grandchildren, something which is very precious to you, something which is a delight to you, a person doesn't forget the day that he graduated from university, if there was a ceremony or a pageantry or something like that. These are events and these are experiences which a person they linger in a person's memory because of the love that we have for them. So I would suggest that there is this meaning of if a person exerts himself in the study of Torah, so then he will be able to remember the words of Torah. But as I said, it's not just exertion in the sense of like a demanding, arduous labor or workout. We had our boot camp this morning. I'm still feeling the pain from it, but it's rather the delight, the pleasure which a person has in the study of the Torah. Okay, I'd like to now look at this same idea closer in an approach which is much closer to the Pshat. Torah she'ein ima melacha. So the Medrash Shmuel, we mentioned that commentary many times, a classic, probably the most popular commentary on Pirkei Avot, written in the 16th century, and it's an extensive compendium, a very useful resource for anyone seeking to explore various different approaches to the Mishnah, any Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. So he says that if a person studies Torah, but it is not with the intention of putting it into practice. That is to say, Torah she'eni ma'melacha, the study of Torah, which is not for the purpose of bringing it to fruition. It's not for the purpose of allowing the Torah study to inform or to direct or maybe to restrain his malacha, his livelihood. If it's only an intellectual endeavor, then goreres avon, then it will bring sin in its wake. And he says the word avon is a more severe term than chet. Chet, which is sin or transgression, has the connotation of error, a connotation of something that was a transgression out of oversight, out of neglect, out of ignorance. The word avon is a more severe sort of sin, and therefore he says goreres avon, because if a person didn't study Torah and he sins out of ignorance, so that's one thing. If a person did study Torah but he can't be bothered to apply the Torah to his life, then this is perhaps a more severe and a more egregious transgression, since he knows what the law is but he chooses to ignore it. There's another approach to the idea of derech eretz. From the context, it is evident that the simple understanding is, like we said, tov yafet talmud Torah im derech eretz, to combine the study of Torah with earning a livelihood. But the word derech eretz has another connotation, I think familiar to us, it should be anyway. Derech eretz is also understood as etiquette or protocol or manners, like we have the expression later on in Pirkei Avot, derech eretz kadma la Torah, that manners, etiquette, protocol precedes the Torah itself, or is possibly the essential foundation for Torah. So it could mean here that derech eretz should be joined with the study of Torah. Or to put it differently, to put it in the negative, if a person studies Torah, but he has no derech eretz, he does not comport himself in a way which is dignified and polite and reflects favorably on the Torah which he studies, so then this is very bad. This is again a severe transgression. It's possibly a chilul Hashem as well. So a ben Torah, someone who studies Torah or someone who represents Torah, has to be a Baal derech eretz. And this was one of the great emphases of the Musar movement. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter emphasized this very greatly, and his followers, including perhaps most notably the Slobodka Yeshiva, which is one of the great yeshivas in Europe, which in turn has spawned many contemporary yeshivot nowadays as well, including Mir and many others, including my own yeshiva, Chavetz Chaim Yeshiva, where this was greatly emphasized, that the study of Torah must enhance a person's derech eretz, and his derech eretz must be exemplary because he does study Torah, and if not, oy vavoy. There's another approach, though, which I think I enjoy the novelty of it. Probably not the pshat, but I like it very much. And this is from Rabbi Farber, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Farber. We've quoted him regularly. This is the Kerem HaTzvi, which we often enjoy drawing upon. And he says the following: Derech Eretz is a term that can and is used in a number of different ways. We've just seen already a second way. The first way is earning a livelihood. The second possibility is etiquette, manners. The word derech eretz is also a euphemism for marital relations as well. We have that in one place which is certainly familiar to us, and another place which should be familiar. I'll tell you right now. The one that we all know is in the Haggadah Shel Pesach. It says, Vayar es anyenu, that Hashem saw our affliction. Says the Haggadah, Zu precious derech eretz. This is the diminution or the absence of marital relations, because the men were so exhausted, and it was to the credit of the women that they successfully interested their husbands despite the exhaustion. But that's derech eretz. The Haggadah uses that expression derech eretz in terms of marital relations. The other place, which I say should be familiar, is in this past week's parsha, yesterday's parsha. I won't quiz you to ask you where it is, but I will tell you. It's towards the end, when Miriam and Aharon are speaking about Moshe, and they criticize Moshe for separate. It doesn't say explicitly really that this is why they were criticizing him. They criticize him something to do with his wife, with his beautiful wife. And according to Rashi in the rabbinic tradition, they criticized Moshe for the fact that he separated from his wife, and they said, we're also prophets and we haven't found it necessary to terminate our relationship with our spouses, so why should Moshe do that? So it says Hashem appeared to them suddenly, and Rashi says, Hayutemeim bederech eretz, vayutzoakin mayim mayim. They were in a state of impurity because of their recent, I don't know exactly what the timing would have been, but they had engaged in marital relations, each with her spouse, and therefore they were they wanted a mikveh, a water in which to immerse themselves because Hashem had appeared to them. Okay, I'm only elaborating because it was yesterday's Torah reading. My point is that Rashi says there, "Yutemeim b'derech eretz." Derech eretz is a reference, as we've seen, to marital relations. So Rabbi Farber says, "Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz." The meaning is that, just looking for my notes here. I'm sorry. The meaning is that it's a good idea to study Torah when a person is married. When a man is married, then he has the context, he has the security, he has the companionship, and he can study Torah in a peaceful manner. He's not, assailed by his Yetzer Hara. He's not tempted by Hirure Avera. If he has a marriage partner, if he has a wife, so then he's able to study Torah in a pure context. Just parenthetically, it is obvious from this thought that Judaism, as of course we know, does not endorse celibacy for rabbis or for anyone. I mean, sometimes circumstances may bring that about, but it's not anything to be aspired to. So on the contrary, according to this interpretation, the study of Torah works best when a person is married. And he says it fits in with what it says, because his responsibilities for his wife, possibly his children on the one hand, and Torah on the other hand, it means he won't have time for transgression. But not just he won't have time for transgression, he won't have the same temptation because he has the context of the derech eretz, and according to this interpretation, it refers to the opportunity for marital relations. I'd like to pick up on this thought that we mentioned a moment ago, just before this comment about the derech eretz, meaning marriage. It's also from Kerem Hatzvi. It says, Yafet Torah im derech eretz. So he says that a person has to infuse his derech eretz, his livelihood, with Torah values. So when a person goes about his business, when he's buying and he's selling, when he's trading, when he's involved in the business transactions, so your business life should be conducted according to Torah values. And a person should not tolerate a kind of bifurcation in which his study of Torah is not allowed to inform or to inspire his business dealings. And unfortunately, sometimes this is the case. People who perhaps are knowledgeable in Torah, and certainly should be knowledgeable in Torah, or comport themselves as if they are, and yet their business practices don't reflect that. So he says, Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz, that when a person pursues a livelihood, it must be infused with Talmud Torah as well. Like we said, that his Torah study has to be placed into practice and not the theory alone. I'd like to mention a story which I heard from my mechutan in South Africa. Our son Simcha, his wife is called Tova Gravitsky, and my mechutin, her father is an accountant, but his father was a shochet. He was the leading shochet in Cape Town, and his grandfather was one of the distinguished rabbanim in Cape Town, one of the great Talmidei Chachamim who came from Lita and came to Cape Town probably around the turn of the last century. My mechutin's grandfather. And so he knows a lot of the South African lore because he grew up, as I say, my mechutin grew up in a kind of clay Kodesh household. Anyway, the story he told me is that once Rav Yosef Kahanim in the Panavija Rav came to South Africa, which he did quite a lot, although he was, sure, a long and costly and time-consuming journey from Israel to South Africa in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. But he would go to South Africa quite a lot. He did quite a lot of very successful fundraising there because, as I'm sure many of you know, certainly our South Africans know for certain, the South African Jewish community are mostly of Lithuanian extraction. So the Panavija Rav, who was a great personality, a great raconteur, and a great Talmid Chacham, he had a wonderful kind of Ahavas Yisrael, and that's why he was so successful and so beloved. So he had a lot of friends, relatives, landsmen, and friends of friends, and Talmidim, and former Talmidim in South Africa. And he went there quite a few times. Even to this day in South Africa, there are people who remember him, as I'm just going to tell you in the story that I heard from my mechutin. Anyway, in the 1950s or 60s, he spent Shavuos, the Panavija Rav Yosef Kahaneman spent Shavuos in Port Elizabeth. Today, Port Elizabeth has a very modest Jewish community, but in its day, it was, vibrant Jewish community, mostly immigrants. So he spent Shavuos there, and he said that and apparently he had a very inspiring Shavuos night. By the way, in South Africa, Shavuos is a long affair, not like in London where, you learn for a couple of hours and already the sky is beginning to get light. I just looked it up actually. I think sunrise on Shavuos in Port Elizabeth is about 7:15 a.m. And of course it gets dark there. We're talking winter time, so it gets dark by about 6 p.m. So if you want to learn through the night on Shavuos night in Port Elizabeth, you're in for a long haul. So he learned through the night together with a lot of his followers, his former Talmidim or supporters and all of that. And it was inspiring and words of Torah. And as I say, he was a great raconteur. I'm sure he kept them captivated through the night. Anyway, at dawn, they daven Shachris. They finished the Torah reading with the Aseres HaDibros, and they finished on a high whenever it was, probably around, let's say, 7:30, 7:45 in the morning. When they finished, he was dismayed to see that after that great night of learning and all of receiving the Torah, all these balabatim went off to work the next morning, meaning that morning right after davening. The story illustrates how sometimes there can be a disconnect between the study of Torah and the pursuit of a livelihood. Now, I want to say right away that I think that one can look at it in a more positive way to say, look, these are people whose circumstances evidently meant that they were working on Shavuos morning, but look, they went to learn and they stayed up all night and all of that. So, it's not just a question of the glass being half full or half empty. I'm sure the Panavija Rav himself also was able to appreciate the fact that they have come to learn, and that's, to their credit. But at the same time, there is a disconnect there. And surely it would have been so much better if it would have been possible for these Alta Litvaks to combine the study of Torah with the fulfillment of the Torah as well. And I'd just like to end by recalling what it says in the Igeres HaRamban, the famous letter of Ramban, which we once discussed actually on Shavuos night several years ago. And one of the things he says there is, Kasher takum min hasefer. If you study, you sit down to learn for however long, an hour, half an hour, 10 minutes, and you read something in a book. Kasher takum min hasefer. When you get up from learning, look for an opportunity to put into practice what you have learned. look, see if there's some way in which you can bring to effect, bring to life something that you have learned, whether a halacha or a Musar concept or a Torah value. Look for a way to apply it. And I would like to conclude by saying, by challenging all of us, myself included, to think what, from what we've learned tonight in this little shiur, what can we put into effect? In what way can we draw on what we've learned to put it into practice so that we can fulfill Yafet Talmud Torah in Derech Eretz, the study of Torah which infuses the rest of our lives, so that we don't feel as if we are somehow facing a disconnect between one area of life and another. Again, I don't mean to say that a person who is less than completely scrupulous and completely meticulous and all those Torah observers shouldn't be studying Torah. Of course not. Nothing could be further from the truth. But the objective should be, like we say, that through pursuing a livelihood that's linked and that's infused with Torah values, then sin will be banished. So those are my thoughts for tonight. And we've even finished a couple of minutes early, which helps to atone for some of my previous